So, Mr. Turner, thank you very much for coming to Stockholm and speaking at our seminar. And the question is, are we too debt addicted? And how do we combat the debt addiction that exists?
Well, I think we have a fundamental problem in modern capitalist economies that we seem to need to grow credit and therefore debt at something like 10 to 15% every year in order to grow our economies at a reasonable rate. And this is unsustainable in the long term. So I think there's a fundamental issue in economic theory about, is a modern capitalist economy with financial institutions, is it unstable? I don't think it needs to be, because I think there are some forms of credit creation which we don't need for growth, but we've got to have policies to contain those.
In Sweden, the discussion is much about the private debt related to the assets and in the households. What do you think? Does Sweden have a household bubble, an asset bubble in housing, and how would you tackle this? And would you actually separate when you're looking at inflation, the inflation coming up in households, and compare with the rest of the economy?
Well, throughout the world, the biggest issue in the stability of the financial system is about real estate. Because let's be clear, banks, what they do, 60, 70, 80% is finance real estate. And we have a fundamental potential for instability because banks can create credit and money purchasing power unless we constrain them in infinite amounts. But urban land, desirable urban land, is in restricted supply. And whenever in economics you put together an infinite with a finite, you are going to have an unstable position. And this is not something that we've thought enough about within economic theory. It is something we have to, it's almost inevitable to the modern economy that that is the case, but we have to manage and contain it.
So what for you is the steps of making the risk when it comes to real estate less, considering the urbanization that we see, and also when it comes to the money creation? What is the steps that should be taking on both a global level and perhaps also in the UK and in Sweden? What is it that we need to do in creating a more stable situation, getting out of
the fundamental thing, once we have realised that banks can create credit and money and purchasing power, we've got to make them create less than they do at the moment. I'm not a supporter of going all the way to what are called 100% reserve banks and abolishing their role in money creation. But we can go a long way along that route. We can have higher reserve requirements, we can have higher capital requirements. We can reduce the fraction, increase the fraction which is required in fractional reserve banks. As for real estate, I think we've got to realise that left to itself, banking systems have a natural bias to focus on real estate. We've got to lean the other way. That means we've got to set capital requirements for real estate higher than the banks will choose themselves. At the moment, the banks left to themselves will establish a capital weight for lending against a mortgage which is a fifth or a tenth of what they would for lending against a non-real estate company. And we've got to rebalance that by setting absolute minima, by increasing those minima against real estate loans.
Thank you. And as a final conclusion, what do you think? We're still in a post-crisis situation? How are we getting out of it? What is your estimation when it comes to the growth, employment, and the possible social aspects in the few years? Are you optimistic, or you're even more pessimistic, or how would you evaluate the situation today?
I think the US is pulling out of a recession, but with a hugely unequal result. The UK is pulling out, but in a very unbalanced fashion. We're returning to the house price booms that we love them, so we'll do it all over again. The Eurozone is not out at all. The Eurozone is in danger of a sustained period of low growth, and if not deflation, then very low inflation. And it has to take actions, because unless the Eurozone takes more aggressive actions than it has so far, the next 10 years in the Eurozone could look rather like Japan in the 1990s.
That's worrying. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you.